On to Nepal then. It's been over a day since a massive flash flood hit the Nepal-Tibet border. Images of devastation continue to emerge as at least 165 people have been reported dead. The toll can further rise as over 1,000 are still said to be missing. The exact sequence of events is still unclear, but it was on Wednesday morning that torrents of water and debris crashed downstream on both sides of the border. Nepal Foreign Minister Shishir Kanal has told Parliament that an earthquake at 8:37 a.m. local time triggered a large landslide that blocked the river and that the blockage then gave away. Kanal's statement aligned with the US Geological Survey report of a quake in Tibet that was north of the disaster zone. However, USGS subsequently updated its conclusion to say that the seismic activity initially reported as quake was instead a glacial collapse and debris flow that caused subsequent catastrophic impacts downstream. Not only was a similar flood last year traced to a glacial lake burst in upstream Tibet, but even as far back as July 1981, a similar lake in the Zhangjiang Valley inside Tibet region drained without warning. In fact, one must be wondering why are such events so common in the region. The Himalayas are warming, causing glaciers to melt and water to collect in increasingly unstable glacial lakes. At the same time, this is young and highly active mountain range still being pushed upward by the collision of tectonic plates that creates enormous geological stress, and even relatively small disturbances can trigger landslides, block rivers or destabilize slopes. The risk is made even greater by infrastructure that's built along these river corridors, especially those carried out by the Chinese in the adjoining border zone. Road bridges and dry ports and custom facilities can all lie directly in the path of an outburst flood. Plus, this is a region where electricity is generated. Nepal uses steep mountain rivers that flow rapidly through these narrow deep valleys or gorges for hydropower plants. Amid all this, in neighbouring India, a group in Sikkim has urged Prime Minister Narendra Modi to halt new hydropower projects in the state and order an independent probe into existing ones. Joining us on the broadcast is Dikshu Kukreja from New Delhi. He's an urban planner, sustainability advocate and socio-environmentalist. Appreciate you joining us on the broadcast. Of course, we've seen the scale of devastation, which is harrowing as far as those scenes that are concerned emerging from Nepal. First up, talk to us about what do you make about the kind of devastation we've seen, and also do you feel the kind of damage could have been lessened had an early warning been sounded?
Well, first and foremost, my heart goes out to the families which have been affected by this terrible devastation. I mean, the images on your screen are so horrific. And when one saw them last night as well, it was just something that, you shudder to think. And at the same time, I have been talking on this matter now since quite some time. We have, in fact, my own foundation, C.P. Kukreja Foundation for Design Excellence, has brought out a whole white paper on the future of the Himalayas. And the sad part is that this is something just waiting to happen, because the kind of irresponsible and rampant urbanization that is being attempted by the arrogance of human mind over natural systems which have existed for centuries, if not millennia, we are looking towards this kind of trouble. Look at this image right now on your screen, the force of that water, the magnitude of that water. Now let's remember, why is it suddenly erupting? It's because we have brought in and planted human interventions, buildings, etc., in the path of that water which has been coming down for centuries. Yes, we can talk about a mild earthquake that occurred. We can talk about a glacier collapsing, and maybe that's why the sudden gust of water. But let's remember that these things have happened over time, and therefore, when you build something, you have to keep that discipline of not building right on the river. or right on that water. You have to build away from it. Plus that devastating image of the gate post or custom house being swept by the water. Does that building look to you that it belongs to the mountains or in the plains? Mountains demand a certain kind of planning where you do not obstruct the water, the flow of water. You do not create mega footprints because you have to also look at the slope of the land. Mountains do not follow, the Himalayas don't follow any administrative boundaries. Those are created by us. So what happens up on the ridge has an effect in the valley. What happens upstream will definitely affect downstream, and therefore planning needs to be done keeping all these parameters in mind. And I feel that its time has come that we don't just blame everything on climate change. We have caused climate change to begin with,
Yes.
but we now need to look at building with future data. We cannot look at historical rainfalls, historical data, and then design our buildings or our built environment based on history. We know we've already altered history. So there is enough technology in our hands to look at future projection mapping, and we have to start designing according to that.
Yes, Mr. Kukreja, important that you mentioned that this was a disaster waiting to happen, and of course so much more could have been done to avert the kind of devastation we are seeing at present. But talking about the glacial flood threats aspect, do you think that is increasing across the Himalayan region?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And like you mentioned a moment earlier about, Himalayan mountains, the Himalayan range being a young mountain range, and it is still forming in many ways. So yes, the tectonic shifts that happen there are not common to many mountain ranges across the world. So we have to live with that challenge. We have to understand that challenge, and we have to accordingly build and plan based on that challenge. So far, we are completely ignoring that. We are just building tunnels, proudly proclaiming how we have shortened distances between travel. What is so great about that? If you're going up to the mountains, there's a charm of driving there for 5 hours versus saying we've reached there in 1 hour. So the mindset needs to change a bit. Yes, there are certain things which are required by national security. No doubt on that. They must be done supreme, but just tourist aspects being exploited is no means of achievement, in my opinion.
Yes.
And similarly, you mentioned about early detection systems. They all exist. But, if you go about building habitation in the pathway of these waterways and these rivers, then what is even early detection going to do? Your house is still going to get washed away sooner or later.
Yes, Mr. Kukreja, I want to focus again on the human-inflicted damage here beyond the climate change, as you mentioned. Are humans and development factors also increasing the risks in the Himalayas?
Most certainly, most unfortunately, yes. And the reason is that, right now we are looking at things in silos. So what happens is the tourism ministry, and this happens across many of the Indian states, 13 Indian states and union territories, which are part of the Himalayas. We work in silos. The tourism department is talking about increasing footfall, and therefore they are trying to deal with that and create infrastructure for that. The road department comes and talks about increasing mobility, increasing connectivity, so they do their own thing. The forest department comes and does something else. The water department does something else, and so on and so forth. However, what Himalayas requires is a more holistic planning. Himalayas is not distributed in these departments. Himalayas is not distributed, like I said earlier, in political and administrative boundaries. So what it requires is a unified approach. Because if you're going to create a road or a bridge or a tunnel upstream, it's going to have an effect somewhere else further down, unlike the plains. Then what I find horrific is that taken by some government agencies, they are borrowing it from the plains. When you build something on a flat ground versus when you build something on a slope, there's a world of a difference.
Yes.
And the first rule to build on the slopes is you allow the natural flow of water. Do not mess with it, and they will not mess with us. But we are going about flattening hills as if, they are just for the calling, at our calling to be done that way. That's not correct. And we need to understand and do proper studies or geological studies before we suddenly
Yes.
dig tunnels, bore tunnels. So all this needs to be looked at. Look at the amount of waste that is being generated because of the increasing tourists. Look at our towns in Himachal, Uttarakhand, etc., etc. You know, tourists swarm those places. The management policy, solid waste management policy is not existing. And you see heaps of garbage being created, heaps of plastic being created. There have to be separate policies for the Himalayas. For example, we need to have a system of how much can be absorbed by one hill station. We need to be able to control that population or the number of tourists that go there. World over, these are strategies which have successfully been implemented. What are we waiting to do?
Yes, Mr. Kukreja, we understood the kind of points you mentioned about the course correction that is required, paucity of time there, but appreciate you sharing your insights on this, and of course prayers going out for all the bereaved families as we speak.
Most certainly. Thank you very much.